Last week in a meeting, I watched myself nod along to a terrible idea and then offered to take on extra work I didn't have time for, and then apologize when someone interrupted me, and then minimize my accomplishments when asked about them. Driving home, I realized I wasn't actually being professional. I was being a good girl. That's when it hit me. So many of the behaviors holding me back were not leadership problems. They were good girl conditioning. Today, we're talking about how to unlearn all those rules we were taught. Because trust me, being a good girl is keeping you from being a great leader. Hey there. Welcome to Lead with Soul, the podcast for women leaders who are done with overcomplicating success. I am your host, Meghna, and today we are diving deep into something that's probably affecting your leadership more than you realize. Those good girl rules you were taught growing up that are now sabotaging your success. Raise your hand if you were raised to be a good girl. You know what I mean? Polite, accommodating, helpful, not too loud, not too demanding, put others first, be likable at all costs. Keep your hand raised if you have ever apologized before asking a question in a meeting. If you've said yes to something you didn't want to do because you felt bad saying no. If you have downplayed your accomplishments so you didn't seem so braggy. If you've spent hours crafting an email so you don't come across as too harsh. Or if you've taken on somebody else's work because they seem stressed out. Or stayed quiet, but you had something important to say. My hand is up for all of these, by the way. And I'm supposed to be a leadership expert. But here's the thing. These behaviors don't mean we're bad at being leaders. They just mean that we are excellent at following the good girl rule book we were given. The problem is that that good girl rule book and the effective leadership rule book, they're often directly contradicting each other. And no one ever gave us permission to put down the first book and pick up the second. Consider this your permission slip. Today is the day we start unlearning what is no longer serving us. Here's what we are going to cover in our time together. The good girl rules most of us were taught, either explicitly or implicitly. How these rules show up in our leadership and hold us back. The real world cost of following these rules. How to start unlearning each of these rules with practical alternatives. And how to handle the inevitable pushback when you stop being a good girl. Because let's be real, there's a reason these patterns are so hard to break. They have been reinforced our entire lives. And there are actual social consequences when women break the rules. But I promise you, the cost of following them is so much higher in the long run. Let's start by naming these rules because you can't change what you don't acknowledge. Rule number 1, be nice at all costs. Now let's be clear, this isn't just about basic kindness. This is about prioritizing other people's comfort over your own needs, the truth, your boundaries. Let me give you a concrete example. Last year, I had a client who was consistently late to our calls or didn't show up, was unprepared, and was not doing the work between sessions. So instead of addressing it directly, I made excuses for her behavior. I would give her extra time outside of our sessions, and I worked twice as hard to help her catch up. Worse, I blamed myself when she didn't get results. Why? Because confrontation didn't feel nice. I was more concerned with her liking me than with her getting the transformation she was paying for. Plot twist, when I finally had that direct conversation I had been avoiding, you know what she did? She thanked me. She needed the accountability, and my niceness was actually enabling her to stay stuck. Rule number 2, don't take up too much space. This shows up as minimizing our accomplishments, physically making ourselves smaller, speaking softly or apologetically, prefacing our ideas with, oh, this might be stupid, but, and then constantly seeking permission. 2 months ago, I was invited to speak at an event. When the organizer asked for my bio, I sent what I thought was a perfectly good professional summary. She sent it back with a note saying, this doesn't actually tell us about your accomplishments. Please send us your real bio. I realized I had listed my responsibilities, but I had completely omitted things like the number of women I have helped, the revenue results of my clients, awards, recognition I have received, major platforms I have been featured on. I literally had to be forced to take up space on paper, let alone a room. Rule number 3, put others first. This one is particularly insidious because it is often framed as a virtue, especially for women. We are taught that selflessness is the ultimate feminine quality. See, this shows up in leadership as taking on other people's problems, becoming the team therapist, working through lunch to help somebody else, staying late to finish work that others dropped the ball on, or saying yes when you desperately need to be saying no. Last month, I found myself on 3 different pick your brain calls in 1 week, despite being on a deadline for a big project. Why? Because saying no felt selfish, and I had been taught that selfish is the worst thing a woman could be. Number 4, keep the peace, right? We're all taught that harmony at all costs is our responsibility. Conflict, tension, disagreement, all of this must be smoothed over immediately, usually by compromising. And this shows up as agreeing with ideas you don't actually agree with, softening your message so much that it loses impact, avoiding unnecessary conflict until it becomes a crisis, not naming problems because it might create tension. I actually once stayed in a business partnership a full year longer than I should have because I was afraid of the conflict that would come with ending it. The result was a much messier, more painful separation that could have been relatively simple if I had addressed it earlier. And then rule number 5 is be perfect or just don't bother. Perfectionism isn't a personality trait. For many women, it is a survival strategy. We learned that you had to be twice as good to get half as far. And this manifests usually by over-preparing, by not speaking up unless you're 100% certain, taking criticism personally, obsessing over minor mistakes, or worse, not starting until everything is perfect. I have a client who has delayed launching her business for 2 years because the website wasn't perfect yet. And when she finally launched with it, she made $15,000 the first month. That's 2 years of income she missed out on while she was waiting for perfection. Let's talk about the real cost of following these rules. The personal cost, constant exhaustion, even burnout, loss of connection to your own needs and your wants, resentment that it eventually leaks out, imposter syndrome that never goes away, course, holding yourself back from your own true potential. The professional cost, being passed over for opportunities, not negotiating what you are worth, doing work that doesn't align with your strengths, building a business or a career that serves others but not you, staying small when you are meant to lead. See, 3 years ago, I hit complete burnout. I am talking, couldn't get out of the bed, crying daily, questioning everything, burnout. And when I worked with a therapist to understand what had happened, we realized I had built my entire business by following the good girl rules. I said yes to every client, even those that weren't a good fit. I created offerings based on what others wanted, not what I wanted to provide. I priced my services to be accessible, code for undercharging. I worked long hours that accommodated everyone else, regardless of how I felt. I also avoided difficult conversations until they became emergencies. That wake-up call wasn't just that I was unhappy. It was that I had built a successful business. It wasn't actually mine. It looked good on paper, but it felt awful in practice. So how do we unlearn, right? Awareness is the first step. We need practical alternatives to replace these patterns. Unlearning rule number 1, to be nice at all costs. See, the alternative isn't to be mean. It is to be honest and kind even when it's uncomfortable. Try this. Before important conversations, ask yourself, what needs to be said here? Practice saying direct statements without softening them. Start with smaller boundaries before tackling bigger ones. And remember that true kindness sometimes requires temporary discomfort. Here's the script I use when I need to be direct about a boundary. I say, hey, I want to be completely honest with you about what is working and what isn't, because I respect you too much to pretend that everything is fine when it isn't. Can we please talk about that? Unlearning rule number 2, which says don't take up too much space. The alternative is owning your value and contribution, not as an ego exercise, but as a way to serve more effectively. Try this. Create a brag document where you track all your wins and accomplishments. Practice stating facts about your achievements without apologizing. Take up physical space through posture, voice projection. When you catch yourself minimizing, ask, would a man apologize for this? I now have a rule that I call my no discount policy. This applies to my rates, no more friends and family discounts. My accomplishments, no more downplaying. My expertise, no more of, I'm not an expert, but. In my time, no more squeezing in quick calls. Unlearning rule number 3, putting others first. The alternative is recognizing that your needs matter too, and that true service comes from overflow, not by depleting ourselves. Schedule your own priorities first and then work others in around them. Practice saying no. Yeah, it's a complete sentence. Ask for help when you need it without over-explaining. Set time aside that is explicitly for your needs, your goals, and your growth. One practice that transformed my business was creating CEO days. Full days that are dedicated solely to my priorities, my vision, high value work that I want to do. And these days are non-negotiable. I don't take calls, I don't respond to emails, I don't handle team issues unless they're truly urgent. And the result is I get more done in one focused day than I used to accomplish in a week of fragmented time. Unlearning rule number 4, keep the peace. The alternative is recognizing that healthy conflict leads to better outcomes and stronger relationships. Name tensions and disagreements early before they can escalate. Distinguish between people-pleasing and genuine diplomacy. View conflict as information, not as a failure. A mantra that has helped me when I'm avoiding necessary conflict is, I can handle the temporary discomfort of this conversation because it serves the long-term health of this relationship or team or project, whatever it is that I'm dealing with. Unlearning rule number 5, be perfect or don't bother. The alternative is embracing growth, experimentation, and the messy middle of progress. Set a timer for tasks that trigger perfectionism. Establish a good enough threshold before you even start. Share work earlier so that you can get feedback. Celebrate your attempts and your failures, not just your successes. I recently launched a program with only a basic outline. There was no perfectly crafted sales page. And I told the audience I was serving, this is an experiment. I know that the content is going to be valuable, but the format, it's going to evolve as we go based on what it is that you need. It became my fastest selling offer ever because people appreciated it. Now let's talk about something important. What happens when you stop following these good girl rules? And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. There will be pushback. You might be called difficult, selfish, high maintenance, a lot, bossy, or maybe a bitch. Here's what has helped me navigate this reality. Find your people. Surround yourself with women and men who value direct communication. They value healthy boundaries. And women who own their power. When you see others modeling what you're trying to do, it normalizes it. Prepare for discomfort. When you first start changing these patterns, it's going to feel wrong. Your body might physically react with anxiety, shakiness, or tears. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you are rewiring old patterns. Start in safer spaces. Practice these new behaviors first with people who already value you, who support you. Build your confidence before taking them into more challenging environments. Remember the bigger picture. Every time you break one of those good girl rules, you make it easier for other women to do the same. Your individual actions create collective change. See, one of my clients was known as the team mom at her company, right? She was always bringing homemade treats. She stayed late to help others, took notes in meetings even when it wasn't her job. And when she started setting boundaries, a male colleague actually told her, "You used to be so helpful. What happened?" Her response was brilliant. She said, "I'm still helpful. I'm just being intentional about how I use my time so that I can make a bigger impact." 6 months later, she was promoted to a leadership position, partly because people started seeing her as a strategic thinker rather than just a support person. Now, let me share how this journey has unfolded in my own life and my business. When I first started unlearning these good girl rules, I worried that clients would not want to work with me if I wasn't available 24/7. I worried my content wouldn't resonate if I was too direct. People would think I was arrogant if I owned my expertise. Conflicts would damage my relationships, or worse, I would be seen as difficult if I set clear boundaries. But here's what actually happened. My client results improved because I was just more direct. My content attracted more aligned clients because I wasn't trying to please everyone. Owning my expertise positioned me as the authority in my field. And those healthy conflicts, they actually strengthened my important relationships. My boundaries attracted people who respected them. And more importantly, it figured out those people who didn't. The most unexpected benefit, I became a better leader. Not because I mastered some complex leadership strategy. I just stopped getting in my own way. When I wasn't exhausting myself by following those rules, I had more energy for creative thinking, for strategic planning, for genuine connection, for bold decisions, for authentic leadership. And I have seen this same transformation with my clients. One woman went from being passed over for promotion 3 times to being fast-tracked for an executive role. Not because she was working harder, but because she started to speak up in meetings. She started negotiating for resources for her team, and she set boundaries around her scope. Another client doubted her business revenue, but then she ended up doubling it, not by creating more offers or by working longer hours, but she dialed in the type of clients she wanted to work with. She had better boundaries, and instead of trying to please everyone, did work that impacted the right people. Before we wrap up, I want to acknowledge something important. These changes take time. You're not going to unlearn years of conditioning overnight, and that's okay. This is not about perfectly executing a new set of behaviors. We want to notice patterns, make different choices when we can, and gradually shift towards leadership that does not require you to diminish yourself. This week, I want you to identify one good girl rule that is affecting your leadership the most. Choose an alternative behavior to practice this week. Notice, where are you feeling resistance? What fears are coming up? And importantly, find one safe person to share this journey with. Think of it as an experiment. It's not a test. You are gathering data for what feels authentic and what creates the impact that you want to have. Thanks for joining me for today's episode. Now, if you're listening to this while simultaneously wondering if you're being extra by focusing on your own growth, first of all, I see you. Second of all, your leadership matters too much for you to keep playing small. Come find me on Instagram at Meghna_Dasani, where we can continue this conversation about unlearning the good girl rules. I would love to hear which one resonated the most. And what are you doing to unlearn it? Remember, you weren't born following these rules. You were taught them. What is learned can be unlearned, one brave decision at a time.